Hey guys, if you've been struggling to play against Death Guard with how deadly and durable they are, and how many Terminator bodies they have after the last balanced status slate, this video is for you. I've been on the receiving end of their might in tournaments and haven't been able to overcome it. Now I have some advice to share with you, so without further ado, let's dive right in. First, as always, let's discuss our enemy. What are the Death Guard? They are an elite, highly durable army that is active in both shooting and fight phases, and is very efficient in them as well. Efficiency there comes largely from the overlapping buffs and debuffs they can produce, they can get for themselves, and they can apply to their enemy. Most of those buffs and debuffs are close to mid-range, so about 6 to maybe like 12-inch range. The durability of them comes simply from the fact that they have a lot of high performance stats that cost pretty low per wound, such as the Blightlord Terminators that are 31 points per model, which I think is the current record holder for the cheapest Terminators, correct me if I'm wrong. Deathshroud are 36 points per model and are some of the most elite Terminator bodies available, and also in that sub 40 points category. Blood Drone, which is also a very efficient platform with toughness 9, 10 wounds and 5+ invulnerable save, is only 90 points for its 10 wounds. They have access to amazing overwatch on their Deathshrouds, which are a mainstay of current Death Guard lists, and that makes it very difficult to interact with them, because they can fry half if not more than any infantry squad, even an elite one, just for coming close to them if you want to charge them. Also have access to pretty amazing shooting thanks to being able to bring Brigands from the Chaos Knights Codex, well, Index, and Plagueburst Crawlers as well. The Plagueburst Crawlers are not as efficient as Brigands are, but they're also not bad if you use them properly. Flying Demons also helps them adding cheap screen stuff like Nurglings, for example, and Nurglings are for some reason still battle line, even though I think for Nurgle it probably should be Plaguebearers, but who am I to judge? Makes it really easy to bring efficient non-battle line like Rodigus, for example, who is an amazing greater demon and gives you a half OC aura and also has a lot of wounds and just is really hard to deal with. Or Beasts of Nurgle, another efficient scoring unit. Far from the end of all the benefits and good things about Death Guard I can say, but last thing I wanted to mention is Mortarion. He's an incredible centerpiece and costs only 300 points for a greater demon body, which is amazing. It's a great amount of buffs, concentration of buffs and debuffs also. An incredibly durable body that is toughness 12, 2+ save, 4+ invulnerable save with 5+ feel no pain and a lot of wounds. For 300 points, there's just no reason not to bring Mortarion in my opinion. He has okay melee and that's probably the only reason why at 300 points he's still not probably broken, but he's getting really close to that. It's just very pathetic that the Primarch has 5 attacks. It's not supposed to be like that. I hope they change it in the future and make him a bit more expensive. Next up, Death Guard weaknesses, but before we talk about them, here's a small commercial break about the sponsor of this video, Adept Roll. So Adept Roll is essentially what's called a Warhammer calculator. Imagine we have a situation like this. We have an Armiger Warglaive and 4 Allan Custodians, and we need to figure out how much damage will this squad do to the Warglaive. And we have weird questions like, do we need 4 models? Is 3 models enough? What happens if like Warglaive kills one on Overwatch or something like this? Should we choose the lethal hit scatter or the sustained hit scatter, considering these guys already have full rerolls to wound? And this is where the calculator like Adept Roll comes in. I'll show you the interface of the app briefly because obviously there are so many features here and constantly new ones are added, so I cannot show you everything in one video, but in general this is what you will encounter when you download it, and it's free to download as well. You have your attacker profile at the top and the defender profile under it, and you have the option of downloading the profiles directly from Battlescribe by pressing the button on the top left here and choosing a gallery of all the factions, and all the profiles of those factions will be right there directly in the interface, and you just need to click view units, select the ones that you really want to add, like say Biologist Purifier, Blightlord Terminators, and you click import selected units, and then you can go into the interface, and I've already preloaded the Allan Custodians here. We'll add them. And here we have the spears, and we even have the modifiers for the spears, which is the reroll to wound against vehicles and monsters. We already have them inbuilt into the profile. I've changed it because initially it doesn't have it, obviously, because the weapon is not really carrying that modifier. It's the unit that carries it, but I decided that I want to have the twin linked added here, and I just go into modifiers, select twin linked, and it's gonna stay there if I want to save it as a part of this profile. And then we go to defenders, we choose Armiger Warglaive, and then we just need to change the amount of attacks. because we have 4 guys here in the squad, we will have 20 attacks, and we can give them whatever modifiers we want, and there are a lot of them here, as you can see. Now we can just press process results, and we'll get a result. We did not add any katas, which we obviously can add lethal hits and sustained hits, and we can see we have dead models here, failed saves and damage. The pink bar underneath shows the results without modifiers. We can also see the graphs of how many dead models we're gonna get, and like 1 dead model is about 61.5% chance of these 4 guys killing the Warglaive, and how many hits on the target they're gonna have. I highly recommend checking out the Adept Roll app because it is really useful. I use it on a daily basis. It's also very useful in a competitive scene where, for example, you have a break in between the rounds, and you know your next opponent is going to have particular units. Say you're playing against Death Guard, and they have Deathshroud Terminators, which are extremely popular now, and you want to figure out how much damage you need to put from your unit into the Deathshroud to make sure they go down and they stay down. And this is something that you can do on the fly without rolling the dice and spending a lot of time. So I highly recommend it. Check out the Adept Roll. The link is going to be in the description. Thank you so much for your attention, guys, and we continue. The biggest problem the Death Guard have currently is their mobility, and it's really easy to spot once you start playing against them. They're really scary if you need to go closer to them, and the game is in such a state now that you really need to go to the center of the board if you want to score primary points, and secondary points for that matter as well. They still have Rhinos with Plague Marines inside them that move 12 inches and disembark 3. They have Brigands that move 12. They have drones that move 10. Mortarion also moves 10. But all in all, the main bulk of the army, the infantry and the Terminators move a measly 4 inches each phase. That means that anything that requires Death Guard to switch directions, switch flanks, go towards enemies' deep strike that somehow manage to crawl into their deployment zone, the Death Guard deployment zone, it's all very difficult for Death Guard. Especially once they start losing their faster units like the Rhinos and the drones, they really become a blob of slow-moving Terminators. It means as soon as they lose those faster assets like, say, drone, and I often see Death Guard players pushing up a drone or a couple drones across one flank to try and take control of that. If you manage to win that fight on that flank, there's really nothing they can send there in due time to prevent you from scoring a lot of points on that objective. In most cases, the skilled Death Guard players will know about this weakness of their army and try to keep controlling the center, because from the center, it's relatively easy, depending on the deployment and the terrain, to relocate to one of the side objectives. Not easy for Death Guard, but easier than, say, switching from one flank to another. There, however, they are at the mercy of terrain, because in most situations the center is not covered by a ruin. So in order to control the center, they need to get to the center, be in the center. And that means getting firing angles on you. Those debuffs that we talked about before with Death Guard that they rely upon to be efficient, such as -1 toughness, -1 weapon skill or ballistic skill from their contagion range, which contagion range for them is 3, 6 or 9 inches, depending on whether it's turn 1, 2 or 3. Same goes for the -1 save contagion. All of those top out at 9 inches, maybe 12 if you use Mortarion's rule. Stratagem for -1 damage they have, which is very powerful, costs 2 command points and also only works in melee. So as soon as you start shooting their Terminators with damage 3 guns, the good old damage 3 really hits hard against the Terminator bodies. -1 to hit for shooting attacks, but that is not nearly as efficient, and if you have Oath, for example, as a Space Marine, it will be relatively easy for you to roll enough force to cause damage. This means that for the most part, shooting Death Guard Terminators is still a very much a valid option for destroying them, and with a 4-inch move, it's relatively hard to hide. So if your opponent is properly moving their Terminator blobs, even if they're advancing, if they're not always rolling a 6 to advance, it is very possible that some of their Terminators at awkward angles will still be visible once they start moving into a ruin to hide. Fighting Death Guard is a different story, because then automatically you are in danger of heroic interventions, you are in danger of -1 damage, which is a very powerful ability, and if a lot of armies nowadays rely on damage too, and a few melee armies have any damage 3 at their disposal. I cannot really, off the top of my head, name any that have an actual unit that brings damage 3, not a character that brings damage 3. You can even have -2 damage because their Terminator Sorcerer has an ability that modifies the damage by 1, and this is not capped by the modifiers to a roll because damage characteristic is not a roll, so it can be -2 damage with the stratagem and the Terminator Sorcerer's ability. By the way, pro tip, the Terminator Sorcerer's ability only works if at the start of the fight phase he can see the unit that he's applying it to, so if you manage to engage the enemy Terminators through the wall and stay behind the wall and then pile in such a way that most of your models are visible, that will be in the fight phase, and at the start of the fight phase you were still invisible for the sorcerer, so he would not be able to apply his ability. A rare thing that you can actually pull it off, but it's possible. Lastly, how do we exploit those weaknesses? First, what the Death Guard player doesn't want you to do is to engage their units that are like on the weaker flank, to flip that flank and then pre-measure in such a way that in their next turn they cannot reach you with their units. This will force them to either abandon that flank, which is bad because, well, points, or to go after it and try to roll like 9, 10, or maybe 11 inch charges depending on how well you pre-measured, and then it's very likely they'll get stuck somewhere in transition and be cut down by your shooting, which hopefully you have. If you're a fully melee army, it is going to be much difficult to fight Death Guard. Still possible, but you really need to pay attention to your activations, to how you move, to make sure that you don't get cut down by their shooting whilst you are going to charge their stuff, and it's gonna be tricky. But yeah, kind of obvious extra advice: bring some shooting if you want your life being easier playing against Death Guard. It really helps. Shooting needs to be able to kill Terminators and vehicles efficiently, which is probably what any shooting should be able to do. And to protect the flank that you've just flipped from being overwhelmed next turn, in addition to pre-measuring, you can also engage with your shooting the next unit in line. So say if your opponent has one drone on the objective and another drone right behind it, if they've not hidden it, which they might, but if they've not, it's a good idea to charge the drone in front and shoot the drone in the back so that there is not an immediate threat after you have cleared the objective. Although we talked about stuff that Death Guard player doesn't want to do, here is an example of what Death Guard player really wants. What they want is to get their pile of units, which can be like Mortarion, Typhus with Deathshroud, maybe like another unit of Plague Marines, all that stuff, pile it onto an objective and fight you there, because there they will excel and very likely win that fight, because again, they have a lot of durability for cheap, and very likely you don't. So again, heroic intervention is very easy now. So if you charge one unit of Deathshroud on an objective and there is another one really close, and it will be close most likely, they will heroic you and you're not killing 2 Deathshroud squads in one turn. I can tell you that for free. It's not within one fight phase win one unit, because if you're fighting with multiple units, well, then they can interrupt and they'll probably kill whatever it is you want to fight with next. So your goal is to pick apart the Death Guard force at a distance and bite off the edges, you can imagine there's tentacles there spreading across the board. So cut off those tentacles and keep the core relatively far away from you whilst you're hammering it with shooting. Only engage the center once you know that the damage you're gonna do is actually going to be devastating. And don't get me wrong, you'll probably be still hit relatively hard on the crackback turn, but if you calculated it properly, you'll probably be able to survive it, or the unit that you're gonna lose is gonna be a nice trade for you. Now, a couple of smaller tips. So don't forget about the Overwatch. It's really dangerous on the Deathshroud. It's pretty much the same as their shooting minus the extra AP they can get on the stratagem. Worst thing you can do is send your expensive unit, like say Death Company Marines, up into the grill of Deathshroud thinking that, oh, now I'll charge and kill them, and get blown to pieces with those flamers, or gooed to nothingness, I should say. Their damage reduction is strong, don't underestimate it. Though it is expensive, and it's very unlikely that your opponent will be able to do both interrupt and -1 damage in one turn, unless they have the Terminator Sorcerers, and we've already discussed limitations of that. And also, the Sorcerer applies the -1 damage to your unit, so if you've charged their Deathshroud with multiple units, and there is no Sorcerer within 18 inches that can see your second unit, then you should be able to reliably get those damage to attacks into the Terminators, because you select the unit to fight with after they select the unit that gets -1 damage, if you get what I mean. You really need to dispose dispose of their shooting as soon as possible, probably even sooner than the tentacles, as I called them, so the faster units that are closer to your edges, the board edges, because those you will probably be able to charge relatively quickly, but the shooting is staying behind the core of the army. So the only way you can interact with it, unless you have like crazy deep strike shenanigans like demons, is probably going to be with your shooting. Make sure they go down and they stay down, those brigands or Plagueburst Crawlers, because if you don't, they will be hammering at you the entire game. Lastly, very simple advice, but something that a lot of beginner players I think make a mistake with, which is going after Mortarion first. You shouldn't do that. Don't get me wrong, Mortarion is very important for the Death Guard army. He's an incredible unit, and his aura of modifier, ignoring modifiers alone, is also extremely important. And for some armies, it's devastating, like Dark Angels, for example. For them, ignoring their -1 damage on the 4-wound Terminators is just awful. But if you listen to my advice here carefully, and you will be playing that careful game, picking apart at the edges where Mortarion isn't, you don't really need to engage him until you actually have to. Remember, Mortarion is faster than most actually killy Death Guard units, and if they send Mortarion after you with their 10-inch move, then it's very likely that Mortarion will be in one part of the board where the actually killy stuff is gonna stay back in the center, and that's pretty much what you want, because Mortarion is not killing anything by himself. He's just not that dangerous. They charge you with Mortarion whilst their Terminators stay back. That's pretty much the best case scenario, because now Mortarion is alone by himself, you can get rid of him, and the Terminators will lose the big source of their buffs and debuffs. Best of luck to you, commanders. I'm sure you will be able to deal with the Nurgle threat and come back with the victory for the Imperium. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.